She thought it was just a stray kitten. Until the forest sent a message. When the wild reaches out to you, it doesn't come with a warning, it comes with a choice. On the edge of a snow-covered forest in Northern California, a woman opened her door and found a tiny creature curled up on her porch. It looked like a kitten, but something wasn't right. Its ears were too sharp. Its eyes too wild. Still, she offered it a bowl of milk, and in doing so, stepped into a story no one could have predicted. Because exactly 24 hours later, the mother came back. And what she did next would silence every expert, every doubt, and everyone who thought they understood the laws of nature. The milk of compassion, a woman's unlikely encounter in the wild. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the first step in a story that changes everything. The wind whispered through the towering pines of Trinity National Forest, its voice soft and cold as it swept across the remote Northern California hills. Flurries of early snow danced through the trees like powdered sugar shaken from the sky. At the edge of that vast wilderness, nestled into a low ridge overlooking a frozen creek, sat a modest wooden cabin. It belonged to Hannah Reed. At 46 years old, Hannah was a woman who wore her solitude like a favorite sweater, worn, familiar, and oddly comforting. Her long auburn hair, streaked naturally with silver, was usually tied back in a loose braid. Laugh lines creased her cheeks, even though she hadn't laughed much in years. Her hazel eyes, however, remained sharp, always observant, like the biologist she once was. After retiring early from a career in wildlife research, she had traded the humming labs and bustling field sites of Colorado for the hush of the Trinity wilderness. Her only neighbors were birds, deer, and the occasional fox, and that suited her just fine. Each day, she moved with quiet purpose, splitting firewood, tending to her greenhouse, sipping black coffee on the porch wrapped in a faded flannel blanket. It was a life of stillness, but not stagnation. She knew how to be alone without being lonely. This particular morning, just days before the official start of winter, the sun had barely begun to thaw the frost that clung to the porch railing when Hannah heard it. A sound. It was faint, almost delicate, like a baby's whimper carried on the breeze. She paused, her mug hovering midair. There it was again. A high-pitched cry, thin and pleading. Animal, definitely. Young. Setting the coffee down, she opened the cabin door and stepped outside. Her boots crunched lightly on the frosted wood planks. The sound was closer now, just beneath the steps. She crouched low. And saw it. A small shape huddled against the side of the porch. Damp, trembling, and half buried in last night's snow. Her breath caught. It was not a house cat. Not even close. About the size of a small domestic kitten, the creature had sandy-colored fur, faint black markings, and sharply pointed ears with little tufts at the tips. A baby bobcat. Alone. Shivering. Eyes wide with primal fear, and something else. Something like hope. The line between the wild and the human world is thinner than we think. Sometimes, all it takes is a bowl of milk. Hannah stayed perfectly still, crouched a few feet from the tiny feline. Her breath clouded in the cold morning air as she observed the creature. It looked back at her, its blue-gray eyes alert and unblinking. Its body was gaunt, the ribs faintly visible beneath a dusting of fur. Snow clung to its paws. The tip of its nose was crusted with frost, and the fur along its spine stood in a jagged ridge. Despite its fear, it didn't run. It was too weak to run. A bobcat, no more than 8 weeks old. Her heart wrenched. It shouldn't have been here, so young, so alone. Cubs that small rarely wandered from their den unless something had gone terribly wrong. Dead mother? Abandoned? Lost? Hannah didn't know. What she did know was this: if she left it there, it wouldn't survive another night. Slowly, she backed up into the cabin. She wasn't foolish enough to reach for the cub, not with wild instincts running hot through its blood. But there were other ways. She poured warm milk into a shallow ceramic bowl and cracked a raw egg into the center. An old trick from her rescue days, calories and hydration in one. She stepped back outside, her hands trembling more from emotion than cold. Setting the bowl down about 2 feet from the porch edge, she stepped away. The cub watched her with a wild stillness. Minutes passed. Then, a cautious shuffle. A sniff. The cub crept forward, paws sinking slightly into the slush. It sniffed the bowl, then looked up at Hannah. And drank. Tiny, rapid laps. Desperate, rhythmic, hungry. Hannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That night, she made a bed out of towels inside an old dog crate she had stored in the toolshed. She didn't bring the cub inside, too risky, and too wrong. Wild things belonged outside, even the broken ones. But she left the crate on the porch, half covered with a thick fleece blanket, and slid the little creature inside after it curled up by the empty milk bowl. She didn't sleep much. She sat by the window, watching the crate, watching the trees. And what she didn't know, as the wind howled down from the northern ridges, was that something was watching back. Waiting. The bond of silence. You don't need words to speak with the wild. Sometimes, it's silence that builds the strongest bond. The following morning broke cold and gray. Frost clung to the branches like silver lace, and the sun hid behind a pale curtain of clouds. Hannah was already up before the light touched the treetops, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands as she opened the cabin door. The crate was still there. She tiptoed forward, holding her breath. Inside, curled tight into the corner of the old towel nest, the bobcat cub slept. Its tiny sides rose and fell with shallow breaths, the faintest hint of milk crusted on its whiskers. One ear twitched in response to the creaking floorboard beneath her foot. Hannah smiled. She didn't dare disturb it. Instead, she returned inside and set out another bowl, this time, with warm chicken broth and mashed boiled egg. She left it just a few inches from the crate, then stepped back into the cabin, letting the door stay slightly ajar. She watched through the slit in the curtain. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Finally, the cub stirred. It poked its small head out of the crate, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning the porch for threats. Then it took one tentative step. Then another. It ate again. Not with the frantic energy of survival like the night before, but slower now, almost savoring it. Its small tail flicked once. She whispered to herself, "You're not just surviving anymore. You're choosing to stay." And that changed everything. Over the next 2 days, Hannah kept her distance, never once trying to touch the cub. She kept meals consistent, small portions of meat broth, soft scrambled eggs, and a bit of goat milk when she could spare it. Her background in wildlife biology had taught her what to do, and more importantly, what not to do. No domestication. No affection that might confuse the wild inside this little one. She didn't name it, at least not officially, but in her thoughts, it became Twig. Small. Barely rooted. Fragile, but alive. Twig began showing signs of trust. After every meal, he would sit on the porch for a few minutes, facing the forest as if waiting for something, or someone. Then he'd curl back into the crate. Once, Hannah saw him paw at a fallen leaf as it skittered across the wood. The way he pounced, clumsy, kitten-like, brought a laugh to her lips for the first time in weeks. In the quiet company of this little wild soul, her solitude didn't feel quite so empty anymore. But a question loomed. Where was the mother? Bobcat mothers were fiercely protective, especially of cubs this young. They didn't just abandon their offspring. Something must have happened. Yet, Twig bore no signs of injury or trauma beyond hunger. It didn't add up. Until Thursday morning. That's when Hannah noticed them, the tracks. She'd stepped outside just after dawn, coffee in hand, when she spotted them clearly in the fresh powder. Larger paw prints. Just at the forest's edge, leading in a slow arc around the side of the cabin and down the slope toward the creek. Not twigs. These were nearly double in size, and spaced farther apart. Rounded pads. Thick toes. Hannah crouched down, her breath catching in her throat. A full-grown bobcat. The prints had come within 20 feet of her porch. She rose slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing. But the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Not out of fear, but recognition. She was being watched. And suddenly, the story took on a new shape. Twig hadn't been abandoned. He hadn't wandered away and been forgotten. He had been left. Intentionally. Watched over. Tested. Or, mourned. That night, she set the crate slightly farther from the door. Left food as usual. But this time, she mounted a trail camera near the porch, facing the tree line. The forest felt heavier that evening. As if it, too, was holding its breath. And somewhere beyond the first line of trees, amber eyes blinked in the dark. The watcher in the woods. The forest sees everything. And sometimes, it watches through the eyes of a mother. The trail camera clicked once, then went still. Hannah didn't sleep much that night. The usual peace of the forest, normally a balm to her restless thoughts, felt different now. Not hostile, not frightening, just heavy. Like something was holding its breath, waiting. Twig had eaten, curled up inside his crate, and gone to sleep without a sound. But Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The next morning, Frost clung stubbornly to the ground as she trudged out to check the camera. She unlatched the casing, pulled the memory card, and slipped it into her laptop once inside. The footage was mostly stillness. Then, at 2:17 a.m., something moved. A figure at the tree line. Barely visible at first. Just the glint of two reflective eyes, glowing like twin candles in the dark. A shape emerged, sleek, muscular, low to the ground. It moved with silent confidence. A full-grown bobcat. It paced in a half-circle near the edge of the clearing, its paws pressing soft indentations into the fresh snow. Its head turned toward the cabin, eyes narrowing. Then, it sat, still, statuesque, for nearly 5 minutes, just watching. Then it vanished into the trees. Hannah's stomach fluttered. She rewound and played it again. And again. The mother. It had to be. The pieces fell together faster than her pulse could keep up. Twig hadn't been abandoned, he'd been delivered. Or hidden. Or maybe even left deliberately on the porch, not out of fear, but out of hope. The mother had been there, likely watching for longer than just one night. That realization shook Hannah more than the image itself. She leaned back in her chair, stunned. Had the wild just asked her for help? Over the next few days, Hannah's behavior shifted. She still didn't bring Twig inside, not fully. She couldn't. That line between the wild and the domestic had to remain intact. But she made sure he was safe. Dry. Federal. She added a heating pad beneath the towels in his crate, hidden beneath layers of cloth so he wouldn't burn his paws. She began to talk to him, not baby talk, but softly. Gently. "You've got someone watching over you, little guy," she murmured once, crouching by the crate as he licked his paws after eating. "I'm just the in-between." Twig blinked at her, slow and steady. His ears flicked but he didn't retreat. Each night, the trail camera picked up the same pattern. The mother would appear between 2 and 3 a.m. She never came closer than 20 feet, never growled, never prowled. She just watched. Once, Hannah captured a frame where the adult bobcat sat facing the crate, just sitting. Still as a shadow. unmoving, watching her cub sleep through the slats of the crate. It was impossible not to feel it, the intelligence, the restraint, the heartbreak. This was not a predator stalking prey. This was a mother waiting for a door to open. Hannah faced a dilemma. If she returned Twig to the wild too soon, he could freeze, starve, or fall victim to another predator. If she waited too long, his instincts might dull, he might grow dependent on humans, a death sentence for any wildcat. So she made a choice. A gradual return. She started placing the crate farther from the porch each day. 5 feet. Then 10. Then closer to the trees. Each time, she added a fresh bowl of food and sat nearby on the steps, watching, waiting. Twig, small but perceptive, never tried to run. But he explored a bit more each day. He watched birds overhead. He swatted lazily at falling pine needles. Then one evening, something changed. It was just before dusk. Hannah had placed the crate closer to the edge of the clearing, right where the shadows of the pines began to stretch. Twig had eaten well and curled up again, tail tucked around his feet. But then he stirred. He sat up straight, ears perked high, body alert but not frightened. His eyes locked onto the trees, at something Hannah couldn't see. She turned, slowly. And there she was. The mother. Not hidden in shadows this time. She was fully visible, 20 feet away, golden fur lit faintly by the setting sun, her breath fogging in the cold. Muscles coiled, yet calm. Her eyes weren't on Hannah. They were on Twig. And Twig chirped. A short, high-pitched sound, not a meow, not a growl. Something in between. A wildcat's version of, "I see you." The mother blinked slowly. Then vanished into the trees again. But this time, Hannah didn't need the camera. She knew the message. She's ready. And so is he. The unexpected return. You can feel it in your bones, the second before the wild touches your world. The storm rolled in fast. Thick gray clouds tumbled over the treetops like a tide coming ashore. By late afternoon, the snow was falling in slow, heavy flakes, blanketing the clearing in white silence. Hannah had moved the crate back under the porch to shield Twig from the worst of the cold. He seemed unsettled that evening, pacing within the crate, pressing his nose against the slats, tail flicking. "Something's coming, isn't it?" she murmured. By nightfall, the wind howled like a voice through the eaves, and the sky turned black. Hannah stoked the fire, set out a fresh bowl of warm milk, and made sure Twig's space was insulated tight. But sometime after midnight, she heard it. A thump. Not loud. Just, solid. Something heavy. She moved quietly to the window and peeked through the frost-kissed glass. At first, she saw nothing. Then she turned on the porch light. And her breath stopped cold. There, just beyond the wooden steps, stood the full-grown bobcat. Up close, she was even more powerful than the camera had suggested. Her coat, a mix of golden brown and charcoal markings, was matted with snow, her paws wide and firm. But there was a limp in her left foreleg. Her ribs, though less visible now, still pressed subtly beneath her thick fur. But it wasn't her size or scars that shook Hannah. It was her eyes. They weren't glowing with menace. They weren't narrowed with suspicion. They were fixed, deeply and unwaveringly, on the crate. Twig had gone still inside, but not from fear. He chirped again. Short. Quick. The mother didn't move at first. Her ears twitched. She tilted her head. Then she stepped forward. Just once. One paw rested on the bottom step. Hannah was frozen. Every instinct told her to retreat, to close the door, to back away slowly. She was one breath away from a wild apex predator. No barrier. No weapon. Just air between them. But she didn't move. And neither did the bobcat. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The mother lowered her body, not in a crouch to pounce, but a gentle, careful slide to the ground. She lay there. Ears forward. Eyes soft. A long, low sound rose from her throat, a trill, almost melodic. Not a warning. A greeting. Twig pressed his nose to the slats, paws kneading the towel beneath him. Then he gave a small, uncertain cry. And the mother answered. Another trill. Quieter this time. Communication. Reunion. Recognition. Hannah didn't breathe for nearly a minute. Her fingers gripped the doorframe so tightly her knuckles went white. Slowly, she crouched near the threshold, just inside the doorway. She didn't try to step forward or speak. She simply witnessed. The bond between a wild mother and her young, severed by hardship, stretched across cold days and colder nights, was pulling itself back together. And somehow, she had been chosen to hold the space between. The mother stood again, stepped closer, her head now just 3 feet from the crate. She didn't growl. Didn't snarl. She gently brushed her nose along the wooden slats. Then, pressed her face against the edge. A soft whine. An unmistakable nudge. A mother's touch. Twig answered with a soft chirp and pressed back. The silence that followed was sacred. Then, the mother turned, to Hannah. They locked eyes. For a heartbeat, Hannah's world stopped spinning. The stare wasn't defiant. It wasn't curious. It was something ancient. A message passed from the wild to the human. Thank you. With that, the bobcat turned and disappeared into the storm. But not alone. Twig pawed at the crate's door, and Hannah, trembling, walked forward. She opened it. No sudden movements. No words. Just permission. Twig stepped out, one cautious paw in the snow, then another. He paused. Looked back. Then trotted into the trees. The crate sat empty beneath the porch light, rocking slightly in the wind. And Hannah, standing alone in the snow, let the tears fall freely down her cheeks, not out of sadness, but awe. The wild heart knows kindness. It's one thing to witness nature. It's another to be trusted by it. The wind had quieted by dawn. A hush blanketed the forest, broken only by the creaking of trees under snow's heavy weight. Hannah hadn't slept. She didn't try. She sat curled in a blanket by the window, the fire long since reduced to glowing embers. Her breath fogged the glass as she searched the tree line for any sign. But there was only white. No paw prints. No shadows. No movement. The crate still sat empty on the porch, a small indentation in the towel the only proof that Twig had ever curled up there at all. It was over. Or at least, her part was. Hannah stepped outside just as the first hint of orange split the sky. The air was sharp in her lungs, the kind that made you feel small and grateful to be alive. She walked to the crate, crouched down, and brushed her hand across the soft fabric. Still faintly warm. And then she saw them. Not one, but 2 sets of prints in the snow. Fresh. Side by side, leading away from the porch and into the woods. One large, wide-padded, deliberate. The other, smaller. Lighter. Bounding. She followed them with her eyes until they vanished into the pines. Her heart ached, but not from loss. From something deeper. A sense of completeness. Closure. Twig had never been hers. Not in the way humans claim things. He belonged to the forest. To his mother. To the wild blood running through his little frame. And she had been nothing more than a bridge. A witness. A brief chapter in a story far older than her cabin or her solitude. She looked to the trees, the sky, then closed her eyes. "Be safe, little one," she whispered. "And thank you for trusting me." 3 days passed before she saw them again. It was late afternoon. Hannah was chopping wood behind the cabin when a rustle caught her ear, light, deliberate. She turned, heart stuttering. Just beyond the tree lean, 2 forms emerged from the brush. Twig, now stronger, livelier, stood alert, his ears perked. Beside him, the mother bobcat. Neither moved. Neither fled. They simply watched. A few heartbeats later, the mother gave a low trill. Twig followed her lead and vanished into the underbrush once more. It was their goodbye. Not because they had to, but because they chose to come back and say it. And Hannah stood motionless in the quiet that followed, her breath clouding in the golden air, knowing that for the rest of her life, she would never forget the sound of that snow, that gaze from the shadows. Or the moment when the wild had looked her in the eye. And said, "We remember." A gift from the forest. Some stories don't need words to be told, they're written in tracks, silence, and the space between heartbeats. After they disappeared into the forest that final time, Hannah didn't return to chopping wood. She stood in the snow for a long while, axe forgotten, her thoughts as still as the trees around her. She wasn't sad. She wasn't even surprised. What she felt was honored. It's not every day that a wild creature chooses to come back, not for food, not out of fear, but to say something only the heart could hear. That moment, just a flicker in time, was a kind of sacred punctuation on a story she hadn't even known she was writing. That evening, she sat down at her old oak desk, the one tucked by the window overlooking the porch. The same place she had first seen Twig curled into a fragile ball beside the steps. And she began to write. Not a scientific report. Not a journal entry. A letter. To no one and everyone. The Wild Knocks Softly, she titled it. She wrote of the morning she first heard the cry. Of Twig's blue eyes and trembling limbs. Of the slow dance of trust they had performed on that porch with nothing but patience, warmth, and time. She described the mother bobcat, proud and silent, who had waited, watched, and, against all instinct, believed in her. By the time she finished, her tea had gone cold. She didn't post the letter. Not yet. But she saved it, knowing there might come a time when someone else, alone in the woods, would need to know this was possible. That wild hearts, even fierce ones, could sometimes choose peace. The days that followed were quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. She still set out water bowls near the porch, just in case. She still walked to the edge of the clearing each morning, eyes scanning for familiar shapes. And every now and then, she found fresh tracks. 2 sets. Never close, never too near the cabin, but always visible. Always clear. They were still out there. And they hadn't forgotten her. Weeks later, the mail truck came rumbling up the snowy road, rare in winter, but welcome. Hannah received a package she hadn't expected, a trail camera catalog, some wildlife donation newsletters, and a handwritten note from a conservation officer she hadn't spoken to in years. He'd heard whispers of her story through the network of park rangers and biologists. "Next time you need help with a wild guest," the note read, "call us. But truth be told, I'm not sure any of us could have done what you did." She smiled and slipped the note into the pages of her letter. Then she stepped outside, wrapped in her thickest coat, and sat on the porch once more. The crate had been packed away. The bowl was empty. But in the trees, the wind stirred softly, just enough to rustle the branches. And for a brief second, Hannah could have sworn she heard it again. That soft, rising trill. A mother's voice. A wild goodbye. Or maybe, just maybe, A thank you. Footprints in the snow. Not all love is meant to stay. Some love just passes through, quietly, completely, and forever. Winter deepened in Trinity National Forest. The snow thickened with each passing week, muffling sound, blanketing every inch of earth with a softness that made the world feel paused. For most people, isolation would have felt like a burden. But for Hannah, it had never felt so full. There were no more porch visits, no more soft chirps in the dark, no glowing eyes watching from the edge of the trees. But the prints were still there. Not every day. Not even every week. But often enough that she never stopped checking. On mornings when the light hit the clearing just right, she'd see them, faint but undeniable. Two sets of tracks moving side by side through the snow. Never approaching the cabin again, but close enough to be seen. Close enough to say without saying, "We're still here." She began keeping a journal. Not just notes about wildlife or weather patterns like she had in her research days, but something more intimate. She wrote about trust. About letting go. About the difference between rescuing something and simply offering it a moment of safety. She started each entry with the same line. Twig and his mother came through again last night. Even if she hadn't seen them. Because they had, in a way. They always would. Their story had settled into her bones. That spring, when the thaw came and the creek behind her cabin began to trickle again, Hannah planted a wildflower garden just beyond the porch. Not the neat, manicured kind, but a soft patch of color meant to grow freely. To return on its own terms. To remind her of what had once curled into a crate and looked her in the eyes. She called it Twig's Corner. And when people came to visit, rare as they were, she would tell the story if asked. But never with fanfare. Never for spectacle. Only for meaning. One afternoon, a local ranger stopped by with a young intern in tow. They brought a small drone to survey deer activity and had heard rumors of the bobcat whisperer in the hills. Hannah chuckled at that title. She didn't correct it. But when the intern asked, eyes wide and hopeful, did the mother really come back for him? Hannah paused. She looked toward the tree line. And simply said, yes. And she didn't come back angry or afraid. She came back with trust. That was the real miracle. The young woman scribbled that down as if it were scripture. Hannah smiled and returned to her tea. Because for her, it wasn't about being remembered by people. It was about remembering what matters. That sometimes, the wild will knock. And if you listen, really listen, it might just step inside your world long enough to change it. Forever. When the wild remembers you. Some stories don't end, they echo. By midsummer, the forest had transformed. The snow was long gone, replaced by wild grasses and ferns that brushed against the sides of Hannah's boots as she walked her usual path to the creek. The garden she'd planted in Twig's honor had exploded into color: lupins, goldenrod, California poppies. A kaleidoscope of life where once there had been only silence and cold. But there were no more tracks. Not in the dirt. Not by the stream. Not near the porch. Weeks passed. Then a month. Then 2. At first, she kept checking, just in case. Every few days she'd walk the ridge or set up her binoculars near the edge of the clearing. Not out of fear. Out of hope. But even hope, she knew, had to make peace with the wild. Eventually, she stopped waiting. She didn't need confirmation to know they were gone. Twig had grown. The mother had healed. They had likely moved deeper into the range, back into the craggy, snow-covered highlands where no humans lived, where bobcats belonged. And still, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt remembered. Because the forest never forgets who it trusted. One night in late July, Hannah lit a fire on the edge of the clearing. The sky above was painted with stars, the kind of summer sky so wide and clear it made her feel like a child again. She didn't build the fire out of necessity. She built it as a ritual. A quiet offering. She sat alone beside the flames, a thick wool blanket over her knees, and placed something small into the center of the fire ring, the towel Twig had used in the crate. It was frayed now, the edges worn from months of gentle handling, folding and unfolding. As the fire crackled and the cloth curled into smoke, Hannah whispered a single sentence into the night. "You were never mine. But thank you for letting me love you." The flames flickered higher for a moment, as if stirred by some unseen hand. She watched until it was all gone. Ash in the wind. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the local ranger station. Inside was a simple photo, grainy, likely from a long-distance trail cam, marked with a date and coordinates. 2 bobcats. One large. One smaller, leaner, with unusually bright markings. Side by side. Walking the ridge just outside the protected lands, over 30 miles from Hannah's cabin. There was no note, no explanation. Just that image. Hannah stared at it for a long time, her hands trembling slightly, not from age or weakness, but from the sudden wave of something deeper. Recognition. She placed the photo on the wall beside her desk, above the garden notes and trail maps. Not a trophy. A reminder. That for one brief season, she had been part of something wild. Something fragile, feral, and fierce. And it had changed her more than any study, any career, any quiet year in solitude. She was no longer just a woman who had left the world behind. She was the one the wild had once trusted. And that, more than anything, was enough. Forever. At its heart, this story is not just about a woman and a wildcat, it's about what happens when we choose compassion over fear, patience over control, and listening over speaking. Hannah didn't try to tame the wild. She didn't demand anything in return. She simply offered what she had, warmth, silence, and trust, and in doing so, became part of something ancient and extraordinary. In our fast, noisy lives, we often overlook the quiet moments. The soft cries. The subtle signs. But sometimes, the smallest gesture, a bowl of milk on a cold night, can become the beginning of a story we'll never forget. So here's your challenge: what will you do the next time the world knocks gently at your door? Will you turn away, or open it, even if just a little? At Paw Prints and Stories, we share these moments, not to tell you what to feel, but to remind you that empathy, even toward the unknown, has power. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about how we connect with the world around us, then you already carry the heart of this channel. Stay curious. Stay kind. And remember, the wild remembers you, too.